Welcome to That Annuity Show, the podcast that will make you an expert in explaining annuities to your clients. Give us 30 minutes each week and we'll shave hours from your client presentations. Now, here's your host, Paul Tyler.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler with another episode of That Annuity Show. And with me are regular co-hosts, Mark, Will, and Ramsey. How are you this morning?
Doing great.
Fantastic. Great to be
Excellent.
back.
Morning, Paul. Doing great.
Excellent. And with us, we have a very, very special guest who's made time for us. And we feel, fortunate, blessed to have him on a show. Is Norm Trainor, CEO and founder of the Covenant Group. And Norm, I understand you're celebrating your 25th anniversary. I mean, you almost don't need an introduction in this in our industry. But I wonder if you could just kind of give, before we sort of dive into the topics that we had just a little bit of a teaser here before the call. But can you just kind of tell us the backstory of what your company is, what you've done for so many years, and we'll flip into real quick why it's even probably more, your message is even more relevant today.
Thank you, Paul, and you're very gracious, and it's great to be with you. At the Covenant Group, our passion is to enable advisors to achieve and sustain peak performance as they define it. All of us want to push as big a rock as we're capable of moving. And for advisors, that can mean they want to earn a six-figure income, a seven-figure income, an eight-figure income. It really is dependent upon the individual. But more than anything, what high-performing advisors want to do is make a difference in the lives of the people with whom they work. And that's why the work that you do and the work they do in terms of being in the annuity space, dealing with retirees is so important, because we are living in challenging times. At the Covenant Group, we use questions and simple guidelines to help advisors grow their business. The U.S. military has an acronym, VUCA, V-U-C-A, that describes the unprecedented times in which we find ourselves. We're all experiencing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. When we are encountering complexity, the unprecedented times in which we now find ourselves, the natural tendency is to look for answers. The starting point in dealing with complexity is asking questions. The antidote to complexity is inquiry and applying simple guidelines. Another example of the U.S. military is that the U.S. military introduced the concept of triage because there were too many soldiers dying on the battlefield. Triage is a simple guideline, 3 simple guidelines that healthcare professionals look for to identify who's likely to survive and who needs to be made comfortable. Triage is still used today and has saved countless lives. So a big part of our work is addressing the questions that advisors need to be asking of themselves and their business and of their clients, and providing simple guidelines. We'll talk about some of those simple guidelines today.
Well, I think that's it's terrific. And I think, answers are generally easy. Good questions, very hard to frame. I think if I think about the last sort of 3 or 4 months we've been living through, if this had been, Norm, to play off your military analogy, if a bomb had dropped and killed, 60, 70, 80,000 Americans plus, I know you're in Canada. I should know the stats, but worldwide, this has been a horrific few months. And not only has created a health crisis, it's also created a financial crisis. A lot of advisors could be, and I think my sense is, and Mark, jump in here, is we still have a lot of advisors saying, okay, when is it safe to come out? I don't think that's the right question to be asking. I mean, how would you frame, what questions should I be asking today as an advisor?
No, it's a great question. Sorry, Mark, did you want to make a comment?
No, please. I'll comment afterwards.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges, Paul, is that in times like the ones we're facing today, we tend to overemphasize the short-term consequences and underestimate the long-term consequences of what we're experiencing. And so one of the things that advisors have to do with their clients is distinguish between risk and uncertainty. Uncertainty is a lack of knowledge of what the future holds. None of us have a crystal ball. We can project all we want about whether we're in a V-shaped recession, U-shaped, or something much more serious and longer term, but no one really knows. Risk, though, is about loss or danger. And while we don't know what the future holds, we can manage risk. And the role of an advisor is to help clients eliminate or mitigate risk. And one of the powerful aspects of annuities is that's what they're designed to do. They're designed to be there for the long term. You know, Warren Buffett gives us two simple guidelines for wealth creation and preservation. Guideline number one is never lose money. Guideline number two is don't forget guideline number one. And you know that's a pretty important simple guideline in today's economy. And so I think one of the things that we're working with the advisors with whom we coach around is this is a great opportunity to do outreach for your clients. And in doing that outreach, what you have to move people from is the negative view of the world, their dreaded future, and the regretful past. You know, why didn't I go to cash at the beginning of February or when the market peaked? All those things that we go through when we have too much time on our hands or we're watching too much cable news and the world seems to be falling apart. And so one of the things that we teach is a concept called solution-focused conversations. And solution-focused conversations are simply conversations that focus on what you can do to shape the future. So a question that's one of the guidelines that we suggest is do an outreach to your clients right now. Your clients have never been more available. You can reach them on the phone. And when you call them, just say, I'm just calling for a 5 to 10 minute conversation, just to get a sense of how you're doing. And just listen, because fundamentally, facts are facts, and people make decisions based on feelings. All decisions are emotionally based. So what we want to tap into is what are the emotions people are experiencing right now when they're encountering social isolation, when there is a number of factors that are impacting them and creating anxiety in these uncertain times. So just checking into how they're feeling. And then the first question we suggest is, well, if we're having a conversation 12 months from now, what will have had to happen for you to feel good about the progress that you've made in those 12 months? And then you just listen, because you want to get people focused on their desired future. What are the steps they can take to take control in a time where we feel seemingly out of control, politically, economically, socially, technologically? And then we drill down. What are the opportunities you want to take advantage of? What are the risks or concerns that you want to eliminate or mitigate? And then this is a great question for advisors who want to get re-engaged back in the market. Are there any other people in your social circle, any advisors or any people that you know that you turn to for counsel in times like this that I should be talking to? It's a great way to get introduced to their accountant, their attorney, to people that are important in their lives.
Well, now that's interesting. Now, like my first instinct, I thought, oh, you're going to ask for, I want to know Mark's friends. Who else can use my help? That's about me. Now this is interesting. Turn it around about who helps Mark. Very interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the other thing, Norm, that you mentioned, which I think is is really an important component of of this conversation is that 12-month time frame, because people, we've all heard it called Groundhog Day, or they're living in this level of uncertainty in the real near term, in the next week, in the next 2 weeks. So to kind of pivot and refocus on a longer term time horizon and what those goals and objectives are over a 12-month time period, I think it can be a helpful exercise.
It's a very helpful exercise, Will, because to think beyond a year, especially in these challenging times, is very difficult for people. But people can visualize what they'd like the next 12 months to be. And so it creates a different kind of conversation. And to your point, Paul, with regard to you have to make it about them, there are three simple guidelines that we're providing our clients with in these unprecedented times. The first is, this is a great opportunity for advisors to redefine work, to really have time to work on your business, because you're constrained in many respects in how you work in your business. The second guideline is, you always start from the outside in. You start with, what is the benefit to the client? How can I make a difference in their lives? And the third guideline is, this is a wonderful time to rethink not only your work, but also your life. And I'll give you an example. One of the advisors that I've had the privilege of coaching for a number of years, his name is Dean Harder. And Dean is based in Indianapolis. Dean's 54 years of age. He has a home in Indianapolis, and he also has a home in Fort Myers. And a number of years ago, Dean and his wife, Jackie, they were empty nesters. They decided that they wanted to have a home in Florida and spend a significant amount of time down there. So they spend the first 4 months of the year in Fort Myers, and then they come back to Indianapolis. And what's interesting is, in that decision to redesign or redefine their life, it also meant that Dean had to redefine his work. So one of the things we worked on, because Dean's a Minnesota farm boy, he grew up in Minnesota, and when he started in the life insurance business 25 years ago, he lived in a small community, only 2,000 people. So he got used to traveling and dealing with people over a distance. One time I did a coaching session with Dean. He was driving 7 hours to Iowa to deliver a death benefit check. So he got used to working remotely with people. And so when they decided to live in Fort Myers for part of their year, Dean moved his business online. And the result of that is, in the first 3 months of this year, Dean did more production than he did in the first 3 months of last year. And he has not missed a beat. So when you think about redefining your work and your life, and think about it in the context of what's important to you and what's important to your clients, you can shift the way in which you do business and prepare yourself for the unanticipated.
This is really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
It's really interesting to the comments that Norm was making before about, the definition behind risk and uncertainty. If you think about it from a client's perspective right now, oftentimes, leading into this, we had essentially a 10-year bull market. And I think risk tends to kind of be, far in the rearview mirror. People don't really think about the fact that the market can correct. They're enjoying the gains, they're enjoying the growth of it. And then you have this major market correction come into play, coupled with uncertainty in terms of what's going on with this pandemic. And that drives emotional behavior. And we all know that investors tend to be very reactive and, make decisions on emotional impulses. And I think right now, to Norm's point, is there's never been a more critical time for advisors to be outreaching to clients and reassuring them, because whether their portfolios may have become over-risked because of the fact that the markets had grown and their equity exposures became a greater concentration of their portfolio, or the client is now panicked and wants to move everything to cash. I think the important thing is making sure that they're making rational decisions and putting products in place that provide not only protection today, but 12 months down the road, five years down the road, 10 years down the road.
Yeah, I
No
think
question.
I think the emotions are interesting, Norm. I love your simple questions, right? How do you feel? Who are you leaning on for support? Like, I think it's very hard. We make things complicated for ourselves. It's so much harder to make them simple. And maybe just pull one strand. I think we've had a couple guests on our show who've talked about building practices on a remote basis. And you can think of it defensively. You can think of it, as you say, transforming your practice. And could I even do more for clients if I'm not in the car driving 9 miles to deliver one check? That's a wonderful gesture. It's an important, certainly massively important moment for family. But what's most important? How does it define your life? You said, I've been taking notes. We sometimes over-exaggerate the short-term nature of things. I'm sure, I know I talk to the agents, okay, look, I Zoom stuff, I'm doing it for the party. I'm going to meet face to face. I am going to drive in my car. I'm going to do this stuff. I saw Goldman Sachs, Ramsey, one of your colleagues actually said that, made a prediction that we would actually cut world demand for oil by $3 billion a day because a company's adopting Zoom. Like, how does that really? So Norm, is this remote a short term? Are we over exaggerating the short term, or is this really the long game, the infinite game we're playing, as we are going to be moving more virtual and we are going to be redefining what interaction means? I mean, what is your perspective?
So my perspective is that a few things. One, I was fascinated by Norm's comments about this idea that it's an opportunity for advisors to transform their business. Because the challenge we all have is none of us before this have had permission to individually deviate from some established norm. So if you're the one person that's doing Zoom calls, you're quote unquote dialing it in, but everybody else is sort of meeting in person, then you're taking a lot of individual risk. But now we're all sort of on this same playing field, and we all have this as close as we can get to a clean slate to be able to sort of redefine things. And I think it's an opportunity. But the other thing that I've always been a strict believer in is that when you think about change on the horizon, or you think about constraints arriving, I've always thought that in the continuum between I'm trying to get my two fingers on the screen here, in the continuum between failure and success, survival is somewhere in between those 2 points. And I've always been a believer that survival and success are actually very, very close to one another. So I've always felt that, like, the same things that you do to survive are the same things you need to do to succeed, and vice versa. So I say all that to say, I think that we're going into a world that's inherently going to be more remote, and the people that develop the skills that allow them to succeed in a remote environment, which, by the way, isn't just knowing how to use Zoom and having the right tools. It's figuring out, how do I talk to a client, through a Zoom channel in a way that's equally sort of compelling to the way I would have done it had I met them over a kitchen table. What are the cues? What are the things that I can insert into that process that will be similarly successful? So that's, I think that this is everybody's opportunity to jump on that. And coming out of this, even if things go back to normal, there's going to be some subset of people that get it right and are going to be able to do what they do in a much more scalable way because they've mastered this new skill.
Yeah. No, that's
one other comment, Norman. I really appreciated the story that you shared about someone you've coached who, prior to this situation, had transitioned to an online business and was able really to not skip a beat when confronted with this recent the recent tragedy. So those advisors, those agents that hadn't yet gone down that path, that are kind of shell shocked now and just kind of reeling with the situation, what would be your advice to them? Because they didn't plan for this. I don't think any of us did, and some of them might be, their revenues might be down. They might be struggling with how to set up and structure and get going. So what would be your coaching for someone who's who wasn't yet walking down a path already that others have?
It's a great question. One of our other guidelines is everything starts small, and you have to start with the known and move to the unknown. The vast majority of advisors in America are over the age of 50. And, so if you've grown up in my era, for example, you grew up using the telephone. Technology like the ones we're familiar with today, what we're experiencing right now, is unfamiliar or less familiar. So what we suggest is start with an outreach by phone, because a lot of your clients, particularly retirees or pre-retirees that are sitting at home because they can't go to work, they're used to being on the phone, especially if they're 50 plus. So you reach out and you have a phone call with them. And one of the other things we suggest, Will, is that often what we remember in relationships is spontaneous actions that people take that touch us, that are an effort that someone makes that was unexpected. And so one of the things that we recommend advisors do throughout the year is plan spontaneity. So Dean Harder's a good example because he grew up, in Minnesota and would spend a lot of time in the car. One of the things he developed was that he would put together a list every morning. If he was going to be driving somewhere, he'd put together a list of people that he would do an outreach to. And he'd call up and he'd say, Will, I'm just driving and I was thinking about you. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. He just called it a check-in call. And that's something we really recommend that advisors do. One of the techniques we teach is that you have 20 relationships. Advisors have 20 relationships that will drive 40 to 80% of their revenue in the next 3 to 12 months, your top 20 list. And those top 20 relationships consist of 3 types of people: high value, high probability clients. So clients that fit your ideal client profile and who are likely to buy from you in the next 3 to 12 months, or to be sources of introductions, recommendations, and referrals. The second is centers of influence, who are going to drive business to you in the next 3 to 12 months. And the third are existing prospective clients, people whom you expect to convert in the next 3 to 12 months. And you update that list every 3 months. So in last year, I had 38 people who appeared on my top 20 relationships list. It didn't mean that the people who dropped off weren't important. It's that they weren't going to drive revenue in the next 3 to 12 months. I keep that top 20 list in front of me all the time. And one of the things that I do in terms of planned spontaneity is an outreach to clients that are on my top 20 list. I have one client who's the president of a life insurance company who's been on my top 20 list since 2002. And in 1 year, he was responsible for almost $2 million of revenue for our firm. Mm-hmm. I call him, I know when now he's not driving into work anymore, but I know that he drives into the office from 7 to 7:45 and he drives home from 5:30 to 5:45. I routinely call him at least once a week I might call him at 7:15 in the morning because I know he's in the car, he's got time, or I might call him at 6 o'clock at night. We might have a 5-minute conversation. Those calls, I hope he's not listening to this. Those calls, I'm thinking to him, he thinks are spontaneous. I have to put it into my calendar. These are the kinds of things that are really important. I'll give you another personal example. I had an aunt who lived to 2 months short of her 100th birthday. She was the second wife of an uncle. She had no children. She had no family. My uncle died 13 years before she died. I was really the only family that she had. She lived in Fort Lauderdale. I live in Toronto. I am often not very thoughtful, like a lot of men. So I had my assistant a routine. We would plan out in the year. She liked flowers, brownies, and chocolates. So I didn't send her that every week. I would put into my calendar when my assistant would order flowers for her, when to order brownies, but I would do it irregularly. So because I knew that left to my own devices, I would forget. I wouldn't remember that kind of stuff. So these are simple guidelines that can make a huge difference in the relationships that advisors have, from their most important clients down to their lower value clients. Make sense?
Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah.
Norm, are you seeing?
Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, Norm, what trends are you seeing going through this pandemic right now as it relates to, is it the $1 million producers that are being more proactive outreach for your services? Are you finding new producers coming on saying, hey, I don't know how to re-engage, jumpstart myself coming back into this when things start to open up again? Are you seeing any specific shifts in terms of the needs of clients from your perspective?
The needs of clients, Mark, or the behaviors of advisors, or both?
Well, both. So your clients being advisors, let's say, and what their needs would be, and anything that they're doing differently that they hadn't done in the past to build their businesses.
No, it's a great question. So one of the things that we're seeing increasingly is that advisors are going online. They're utilizing Zoom. They're having more interaction. And there are three key considerations with regard to the utilization of technology. The first is familiarization with the technology, with Zoom. And so, one of the challenges is where do you put the camera? Because our tendency is when you're talking, I want to look at you. But when I'm
Right.
looking at you, I'm not looking at the camera. So it looks like my lids are down. It looks like I'm falling asleep. So it's not particularly conducive to you feeling I'm paying attention to you, even though I am, because my presence is different. So you have to understand first and foremost how to use the technology. The second is cadence. The way you communicate online is different than offline. First and foremost, when I'm talking to you, I'm seeing my own image reflected back. That doesn't happen when we're sitting in a room
Right.
together. So people have to get over looking at themselves. But it's also great feedback because, we do a lot of webinars. I'm on Zoom all day. I get Zoom fatigue. And one of my associates was watching me on a webinar and said, Norm, you got to smile. You're not smiling. You're too serious. Likability is important. So it's not only your cadence, it's not only how you communicate the language you use, but it's also your presence. So it's the technology, it's what you say and how you say it. You have to be much more succinct. My wife highlights for me all the time, I'm obtuse and I tell stories that are too long. One of the things I have to learn when I'm communicating online, tighten it up and be clearer, and also smile. There are four things that Deborah Jasper, who runs a wonderful company called Mindset Digital, taught me about online communication. The first is you have to come across as trustworthy. You have to come across as credible. You have to come across as relatable. Your humanity has to come through, and you have to come across as likable. All of these things, Mark, are part and parcel of communicating effectively online. It's just as important offline, but each is different.
Yeah. So, Norm, I know a lot of companies, a lot of carriers are asking themselves, where do I want to be in 12 months? What's success in this environment? Well, triage. Well, can I even take insurance applications? Can I underwrite them? I know Jim Curley, a friend of ours, long-term friend of mine, another spectacular person you've attracted into your orbit here over the years. Tell us if we're trying to build programs, if we do have carriers listening to our program, how can your organization help sort of build a path for advisors to become trustworthy, likable, have a right cadence in this digital environment?
It's interesting, Paul. I would answer that in two ways, and I'll share a story with you. In November of 2018, I got a call from a head of training whom we had worked with about probably 2005, 2006, and they're in the annuity space. And she called because the head of distribution for that organization he had been a client with another company at that point in time, and he said, reach out to the Covenant Group because they have over 2,000 advisors. He had formed a president's club of his top 30 advisors, and he said, we want to do something special for them. And so we put together a program, and he wanted the advisor to have skin in the game. So he wanted them to have money on the table. So they did a 50-50 cost share. 19 of the 30 advisors signed up for that program. We started in March of 2019. They increased their life premium by 75% in the first 6 months. They significantly grew their annuity premium. And what had happened is that advisors, we're all human. We all look for low-hanging fruit. What was the low-hanging fruit in 2018, 2019? The S&P went up 29%. Mark touched on it. People are short-term. So markets have been going up for 10 years. A lot of people have forgotten 2008, 2009. And one of the things that in our work we do is say, you've got to cover the whole spectrum of how people work. Anyway, that program was very successful. We now have about 60 of their advisors in that high-level program. But in March, the president of that company reached out to me. They have over 2,000 advisors. They have young advisors. They have advisors from 2 months to 40 plus years. He said, our advisors are frozen in the headlights, and we need to reinvigorate them. So we put together a simple program. It consisted of 2 webinars. The first was how advisors thrive in times of uncertainty. And the second was the power of social inclusion. You can double your business within 2 degrees of separation, the people you know and the people they know. We did those 2 webinars, but our whole philosophy is that you can't, training events don't change behavior. You have to address the before, the during, and the after. So we delivered this program, these 2 programs over about a 6-week period. We sent them some articles. They got access to one of my books online. We primed the pump before we did each webinar, and we continued that cycle for 6 weeks. We got a tremendous response from their field force with regard to teaching them simple techniques of outreach that can reinvigorate them. That's what I think carriers are doing now. The leading carriers are saying, our advisors are hurting. Our clients are fearful and isolated. We need to do an outreach. That answer the question, Paul?
No, it did. It did. So we're sort of at the end of our time. Norm, okay, what's the best way for if what the questions you asked and the advice you gave had resonated with anyone, which I'm sure I'm sure everybody's found something to latch onto. What's the best way to get engaged, follow you, get engaged with your program? Go to your website. Is the website the best place to start?
Website's a great place to start, www.covenantgroup.com. We also have another website specific for advisors, www.mybusinessbuilderacademy.com. We also have a North America-wide toll-free number, 1-877-903-3878. And we're open for business. We love working with advisors. We love working with you. So feel free to outreach. Just one thing I will add, Paul, we do a series of webinars every week. We have a webinar tomorrow where we'll be interviewing Dr. Deborah Jasper of Mindset Digital, who's one of the top communications experts in North America. We've had a tremendous response, as I'm sure you have, to these webinars because people are hungry. So I would suggest wherever possible, people tune in to those, or they're also recorded on our website, so people can go and look at them.
Okay. Well, excellent. We'll put all those links in our show notes. And gentlemen, any other questions for Norm? We still have him here with us.
Not so much a question, but just a comment. So thanks, Norm. A lot of food for thought here, and I think some helpful pieces of information for people to kind of think through from an impact perspective on some of the themes and the concepts that you touched on, and how those could potentially really be impactful for for the advisors that are listening to this program. So thank you.
Thank you, Will.
So I was just going to add a couple things. One, yeah, it's actually really good to hear. First of all, it's great to meet you in person, Norm, and I enjoyed watching those videos that are on YouTube. It definitely gives a very good sense for your philosophy and how you approach things. I think one of my key takeaways from all this is there are a whole lot of advisors, and we can expect advisors to sort of figure it out for themselves, and many of them will try and do that. But I think that it's actually, my takeaway from this is it's in the industry's best interest, so carriers broadly, to make resources like the ones you provide available to their advisors as much as possible. I think we can't just let advisors help themselves. I think the industry has to reach out and help advisors make the transition as well. That's probably my biggest takeaway from this conversation. So thank you for that.
Thank you,
Mark. Any last thoughts here?
Yeah, no, thank you, Norm. This has been fantastic, and I think it's just very reinforcing to hear your commentary as it relates to how business is evolving and how it's going to continue to grow. And I think that coming out the back end of this, I think people will be a lot more efficient, a lot more focused, and I think it's going to just provide a lot broader scope of business that people don't think about necessarily.
Yeah. So, Norm, listen, thank you so much for your time today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on here. And just generally, thank you for all you do for the business, for the industry. We need, the leadership you provided, and inspiration has been, phenomenal over the years.
Thank you for all you do, Paul, and your whole team. All of you, you do a great deal every day as well. So it's an honor to be part of this show.
Great. Hey, thank you very much. And again, we'll have all those links in our show notes, and tune in again next week for another episode of That Annuity Show. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com.